Hello Year 11, this video is going to discuss your next assessment task for English for Into the Wild. So as you can see on your gold sheet in front of you, this is your second assessment task and it's the multimodal. What that means is it's going to have multiple modes of communication. In our case, it's going to be a podcast. You'll see there that it's due at 4 p.m. on the 20th of June and we'll talk more about how you submit it in a second. Okay, so this unit's called Contemporary Possibilities. When you think about what that module means, we're looking at how the medium of film has allowed a more interesting, perhaps even more complicated way of telling a story. For your assessment task, you are to write and record a podcast. The podcast is to reveal your understanding of the whole module and then zooming in on Sean Penn's film Into the Wild. Now, the podcast is designed to get you engaging with the concept and the ideas and an opportunity for you to have personal voice and show your personal understanding of the module and the text. With that in mind, to give it some focus and to frame your podcast, you're addressing this question. Despite being inspired by real events, Into the Wild is definitely not a documentary. Instead, it is Sean Penn's artistic representation of one man's search for meaning. To what extent does this view align with your analysis of the film? Okay, so there's a lot in that question. We want the podcast to give you an opportunity to debate, to discuss, to really come up with your view, your interpretation. So even though Christopher McCandless was a real person, it's not a documentary. It is a piece of drama. And you think about the way Sean Penn has composed this film, it's not meant to be completely loyal to the truth. It's Sean Penn's recreation of those events. And think about what his message is. So really thinking about Penn as the composer is even more important than really Chris as a character. So you need to agree or disagree or unpack that question and think, to what extent does that view align with your analysis of the film? Now, to make the podcast engaging and interesting, you might want to think about playing roles. So you have to have a speaking role in the podcast. Absolute, that's compulsory. But you might interview a parent or a neighbour, brother or sister, so that there's some dialogue back and forth, and you might even play a role. So your parent might pretend to be, some sort of film critic, or you might want to decide that, Dad's going to play the voice of Sean Penn and interview him. You can be quite creative with those components. Okay, so how you submit this is a little different than you did your first one. So there are two parts to the submission. The transcript, the actual typed up transcript, must be submitted, and then the audio where you actually record your voice also needs to be submitted, but they're submitted separately. So the transcript, the typed up Word document, is going to go through Turnitin the same way you did your first assignment, but the audio needs to be able to be played with just a simple press of a play button, and that's going to be uploaded to a special Google Classroom. So not your normal Google Classrooms. Everyone in Standard needs to join this code, which is on the board in front of you, and it's on your gold sheet. You join that class, and that is where you'll upload your assignment. Both times it's 4 p.m. is the deadline for both submissions. Now, in terms of timing, your podcast can only be 4 minutes long. At 4 minutes, the marker will press stop. So anything, if you go over time, we're not even listening to. So you need to be concise and precise with your language. Your teachers will talk about how you can submit the transcript. No point doing the audio until you get transcript feedback to your classroom teacher, and how you can get feedback on that. That is 2 weeks earlier than the real date, so that it's time for your teacher to make comments, return to you, and give you time to make actionable changes. Okay, so how we're assessing it. The marking criteria is on the board. So you'll see that we're looking for 3 key skills. The 3 dot points. The first one is really how well you're answering the question. The second one is how well you're analysing the film. And the third one is how well you're composing in the podcast form. So to get into the A range, which is our 17 and above, we're looking for an informed argument. An argument meaning you've got something to say, not just information, but a line of argument. that effectively addresses the question. So you really need to engage thoughtfully with that question. The second dot point is your effective analysis. So that's how well you're unpacking the filmic devices, the cinematic choices, and how they communicate meaning. And for that, we want well-chosen textual references. So it can't be descriptive. We really want to see lots of evidence. And the third dot point is the podcast form. So we want it to be thoughtful and personal, using language and form appropriate to the podcast as a medium. So think about the structure, think about the dialogue back and forth, think about maybe having an interviewer and an interviewee, that sort of thing. If you have questions about that, I'm sure your teachers will be happy to address them. Okay, so the process. Everyone works differently, but here's something to get you started. Students often get straight into the writing. You want to start by thinking about the question. Maybe writing the question out on a big A3 piece of paper and unpacking every word choice. Read widely about the real story, about the documentary that was made, about Sean Penn. Listen to interviews with Sean Penn. Really think and unpack before you can even start planning. Make sure you've got all the knowledge in your head first. Then plan your approach. What scenes, not from the novel, pardon me, from the film, what evidence from across the film are you going to be selecting in order to validate your argument? And then draft. Now, I say building a skeleton because I want them to all match together. I don't want it to feel like bits and pieces. I want them all to stand up strong together. So pick the evidence from the film that's going to work in cooperation, and then you start writing. Drafting, editing, and refining. One thing I've said is maybe reading it out loud as you write it will be a good way to check that it's going to work for the podcast form. Get feedback. And I'm not just saying to your teacher, I'm actually saying read it out loud. Get mum or dad to be that second person and have somebody else listening. Get their feedback. Does it flow? Does it make sense? Is it clear where the evidence is being included, or is that getting confusing? After you're getting that second person feedback, do some more polishing, refining. Also thinking about that time frame. Are you spending too much time on some scenes and therefore others are rushed over? Manage those 4 minutes. And please do not leave the recording, the actual digital component too late. You really need to allow yourself time to record that and make sure you edit it so it's nice and fluid, but it's also professional. No background sounds and silly things like that. And then you'll submit it via Google Classroom and turn it in. Now, this is a formal assessment task. So the very last page of your gold sheet reminds you about Freshwater's policies and procedures. Please take a minute to read that carefully, and if you have questions about that, talk to your classroom teacher. Otherwise, I'm also available to answer any administrative or sort of NESA-like questions. Good luck, Year 11. Please work hard and have some fun with this assignment.